Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Jonathan Crisp. I'm one of the directors of BarnOwl. We're very excited today to present the state of artificial intelligence and artificial intelligence, especially related to corporate governance. So we're in for a fascinating session today. I think before I start, just some housekeeping. Number one, everyone's muted, well, except for our speakers, of course. But at the end, we'll have Cheryl will open up the floor and we can have questions and answers then. That'll be the last 10, 15 minutes. But in the meantime, you can post comments in the chat box if you would like to. The other thing is that we will provide this session is being recorded, so that will be on our website, as well as Lionel and Michael's presentation will be available on our website after the session. So we're very honored to have Michael Judin and Lionel Moyal. They're very well qualified, very well versed in this particular subject. Michael and I go back a long way. So Michael was involved with one of the main members on the task team of the King Code, right from, I think, even from King 1, but certainly King 4. So I'm going to just introduce Michael and Lionel, but their biographies are so long and so well qualified that I'm actually going to read them, just so that we, as I say, we are very honored to have guest speakers like we've got today. Michael is a non-executive ex officio director and legal advisor to AmCham, which is the American Chamber of Commerce. Michael is a co-chairman of the Corporate Governance International Development Subcommittee of the American Bar Association's Business Law section. Michael is a member of the E-Commerce Advisory Committee of the Financial Sector Conduct Authority. That's the FSCA, used to be called the FSB of South Africa. Michael was a member of the task team which wrote the original code for CRISA, which is the code for responsible investing in South Africa, and is a member of the task team that wrote the new code. Michael's a member of the advisory panel of experts of the Good Governance Academy, NPC, chaired by Professor Mervyn King. Michael is a non-executive chairman of the Conscious Leadership and Ethics Institute of NPC. So thank you, Michael, for joining us today. Wow, that is one hell of a biography. And we're very honored to have you here today. Lionel is the SI and channel partner lead of Microsoft Africa region. Lionel has a degree in aeronautical engineering, so that's no mean feat, and an MBA from Wits University. So wow, that's incredible. Lionel is an advocate for digital transformation, responsible for AI and organizational innovation through people and technology. Lionel is a subject matter expert on aligning technology-driven transformation with corporate governance as per King 4. Lionel was a co-founder and managing director of Intivate. I remember Intivate, actually, a leading Microsoft partner focused on productivity, cloud, and mobile solutions for enterprise customers. Lionel's passionate about technology and innovation and engages to support local technology and the startup community. So I'm going to hand over to Michael and to Lionel. And again, a big thank you, Michael and Lionel, for joining us and presenting at our info sharing session today. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jonathan, for this really generous introduction. I'm gonna share my screen, and then I'm gonna kick off actually with a bit of an introduction around where we are from a technology perspective, the state of AI, and the intention is really to try and debunk a lot of the myths that are out there, make it a little bit more accessible and practical. I'm going to give you some real examples of how we can start to use AI in the workplace to change the way we work. And then Michael's going to come in afterwards and talk more around the governance aspect, the control that you need to have, the important aspects in terms of when you start to use this in a organizational context. What are the implications from a legal perspective as well that are very, very important, because this is entirely new tech, and it's very interesting to see how it starts to get used and the pitfalls and what you need to take care of. So with that, I presume you can see my screen. I'm gonna just quickly talk you through a couple of slides just on the background of how we got here, because there's a lot of hype at the moment around AI. Now, everybody's heard about AI and how it's changing the world. And, you know, in the last few months with the release of ChatGPT, it's made a massive impact on technology, on business as a whole, and in fact, potentially on society, just in terms, and it's important to understand what it can do, what it can't do, how it's going to get to, how you're going to start to see it manifest inside organizations as well, and the things you need to start thinking about. Just a quick, brief history and a few bullet points here in terms of some of the big milestones that led to where we are today. In 2016, so AI, first of all, is an old field. It was, you know, started in the 1950s, and it's quite a broad field. But essentially, there's been a few big developments and milestones that have occurred. The first one is in 2016, we achieved object recognition human parity. That means an AI algorithm or model can essentially recognize objects from a picture or a video as well as a human. In 2017, the same milestone was reached from in terms of human parity, but this time for speech recognition. So that means you can play a clip with a funny accent. You know, there's an example, one of a person coming into a takeaway, ordering McDonald's with noisy backgrounds, etc., and the AI is able to recognize the speech, transcribe what it is, and place an order. So speech recognition, as well as a human, can do it. In 2018, it was human comprehension. In 2018 as well, a number of milestones were reached. Machine translation and speech synthesis. Speech synthesis being the ability of an AI algorithm or a piece of software to basically take a text and reproduce human language out of it using accents, etc., to near human parity in 2018. And we've seen some of the demos that have come out recently as well, with real accents, etc., almost indistinguishable. In 2019, we reached general language understanding human parity. And this is really key because all of these milestones have led to really where we are today, which is the advent of large language models, which completely change the way AI starts to consume information, interpret information, and be able to reason over information, and do this as well or better, in fact, than a human. In 2020, it was around document summarization and captioning, and then the GPT models from OpenAI that started to come out, and then ChatGPT obviously coming out more recently or end of the last year as well. So, just all of these elements combined together basically are coming together to really lead to where we are today in terms of this new capacity of generative AI. And just to show you where generative AI fits, it's one piece of the general AI field. You know, artificial intelligence, I mentioned earlier, was since the 1950s. It's been a computer science field, many books written about it, many examples of, you know, or attempts to turn machines into more intelligent pieces of algorithm. In 1997 only, we started with machine learning, things like neural networks, etc., coming out a little bit later with deep learning. Big examples of deep learning are, you know, for example, Big Blue playing chess, being able to to do layered neural networks, which starts to represent how a brain actually works, and using that kind of complexity and training rather than programming every single possibility. But it becomes training. It makes mistakes, absolutely, but it learns just like a human would. And then in 2021, with all of these milestones that I mentioned previously, we are at a point where we can now create generative AI, which is around recreating content, interpreting content, being able to create visual content as well as text and image, and now video as well. So, and just briefly, the 2023, what we call this era of generative AI, there's really 4 key areas that came up with OpenAI to start with, but now you're seeing it with many organizations as well and many different models. The GPT-3 model, which is generally around large language models per se, and I'll talk a little bit more about what that is. A large language model, it sounds complex, but it's actually a very simple concept, which essentially uses very large bodies of text that have been fed into a very capable training model with billions of parameters, literally, so that it gets experience, it gets to learn on how this text actually relates to each other, and is able to then generate or predict the next word. That's really what it does. It has a probability model, and it predicts what should come next in a sentence at its very basic. But what's very interesting is through scaling, and through giving it larger and larger amounts of data and larger amounts of compute, what we've seen is some emergent behavior come out of that. And maybe just to define what we mean by emergent behavior is when you get a different qualitative output by changing just quantitative inputs. In other words, the more you put in something, suddenly you get a very different qualitative response. And it's quite interesting to see that emerge inside of these training models. So you've got things like text models, Codex, which is a code generation model, which is really interesting. This has become very popular amongst developers as well, because if you think about computer code, it's actually just text. And being able to train on large volumes of text, of code, means that models can actually start to predict based on what it is you're trying to do. It shows you this is how it thinks you should be doing it, and that makes developers much more productive. Not only that, but it actually gives the capability to AI to say, for example, if I need to book a flight, and it knows that you can get an API, an application programming interface, that's how computers or pieces of software talk to each other. It can then call that piece of software and actually execute code against it and actually do the booking for you. So through text, you would have said, I need to book the following thing, and it will figure out based on where it needs to go and book, how does this piece of software work, and it generates the code to go and do it for you, which is really interesting. DALL-E, which is image generation, very interesting as well, and I'll show you an example of that, where you can say, I need a picture of a horse on the moon, and it will actually generate that, and it looks like a real picture. And it uses very large bodies of content and media to be able to generate this through things like diffusion models, which is a technique which has recently been developed, and it's incredibly powerful to create realistic images, and that is now being applied to video. And then, of course, ChatGPT. The best way to demonstrate ChatGPT is, if you haven't seen it, is let me give you a couple of scenarios which are in the business context, which are very interesting. And the intent here is to show you some of the behavior which is unexpected out of this technology, which you can start to use and start to think about how do you transform your business using it. So a couple of examples. Using plain ChatGPT, first of all, doing something like, for example, forensic analysis. So what I did here is I went to the PFMA reports, the Public Finance Management Act, and it's essentially the Auditor General creates annual reports on how this act is being implemented in municipalities across the country. It's a very large, I think it's a 150-page report each time. And I thought, well, I gave it 3 years of reports, which I downloaded from the PFMA site. The link is on the deck. And so it's about 450 pages of PDF content. It's a lot of content to go through, and I'm not an auditor. I don't I don't spend a lot of time reading about the PFMA, but I thought, you know what, let me use some example content here and start to reason over it and start to analyze it and try and get some very good insights out of it. So I said to ChatGPT, please read these 3 reports from the Auditor General and tell me about any specific noteworthy trends related to medical negligence. I picked medical negligence actually because my first prompt before this prompt to the model was to say, give me a summary of what's inside these reports. And one of the areas was medical negligence. There was a lot of other topics. So I just picked one out of interest. And it says, okay, based on the information extracted from the 3 reports, there are some noteworthy trends. And what's interesting here is it's now combining the insights from multiple reports. So it's not just giving me a summary of each report, but it's now comparing trends across the different reports. So it's saying here, the estimated, so key topics, estimated settlement value of claims has increased between the years. So from 2020 to from 124 billion to 2021 to 153 billion in the 2022 report. So very large numbers of settlement value estimates. In other words, if every one of the medical negligence claimed had to be settled, that's how much the government would have to pay. The increased number of outstanding claims. So there's outstanding medical negligence claims against the department amounted to, and you can see the numbers as they increase here as well. So there's a number of outstanding claims, there's estimated settlement values, and there's actual paid out amounts as well, which it's comparing between the years. It's saying as well, impact on service delivery, concerns about management, and efforts there to address these medical legal claims. However, there are shortcomings in the measures implemented. So this is interesting. So now I don't know a lot about these settlement values of claims. So I thought as a next question, let me go a little bit deeper here and say, give me more details about these medical negligence claims so I can understand a little bit more about it. And then it finds some content in the 2022 report, and it says, and it explains, how these claims actually happen. They occur through litigation for compensation as a result of loss caused by the department. Most common is medical legal, it's negligence and malpractice, etc., etc. I'm not going to go through all the details. And then again, it shows me the estimate settlement values, which are absolutely astronomical. And I'm thinking, wow, this is hectic. Is it going in a better direction? Is it improving? Is it getting worse? So let's get it to compare. So now think about this. I'm acting as, for example, an auditor or an analyst, and I've been given these reports, and I've been told to, analyze these things. Tell me what you think. What does it mean? Maybe we need to present a business summary about this, or maybe we need to create some action plans in terms of how we go and address this. For example, if I'm working for government. So this is a very useful way to consume information. Now, I used here public audit reports, but think about if you have you've just conducted an audit inside of an organization and you have hundreds of documents, thousands of documents, which you need to consume, and you need to find trends, patterns, etc. It could take you days, months, with a team of people to analyze through this information. Whereas it's very easy to say, let's use a tool like ChatGPT or a large language model and feed it large amounts of information and use its capabilities. You didn't have to train it on this new content. It's been trained. It has the abilities now, and it has a depth of knowledge. But it has the abilities to now take in new content, which is your own content, and start to analyze this and give you patterns out of it, give you insights which are very actionable. So that's the point, is that you do not need to train these models again. You now use it as a tool. And the best way to look at it is, you have your phone. Your phone is like having a calculator with you at all times, because it's got a calculator mode in its or application in it. So you permanently have a calculator in your pocket. Think about a tool like ChatGPT or a large language model in this way as a reasoning engine in your pocket. It's literally that simple. ChatGPT comes with an app. You can ask it questions. You can feed it information. You can have it assist you to answer questions. So again, a couple more examples quickly. I then went just a little bit further in this one, and I said, create a table comparing the values of paid out amounts, outstanding claims, and settlement values of claims across the 3 audited years. It's always nice to see not just text, but tables so that I can maybe plot this on a graph or use this in a presentation. And it's gone and fetched this information for me, telling me what the paid out amounts, and you can actually very quickly see a trend over here. And then you can start to ask it interesting questions. So in this case, it was, again, public information, but I said, with all of these outstanding legal claims, there must be some lawyers making a lot of money. Do the reports mention anything about the legal firms that are making such claims against the departments? And it says, no, there's no such information in there. But however, if I'm the auditor or on the team of auditors, probably that information is in one of the non-published reports, or it's not been published, but it's there. And you can start to get some very interesting insights as to, who's doing all these claims. Is this all legitimate? Are there companies that are specifically making a ton of money on this? But it becomes very actionable. So, and as a last question, just to show you that this works on anything inside those reports as well, I said, give me similar findings on IT, and it gave me a summary again. Interesting things about cybersecurity: 81% out of 201 municipalities or government departments have ineffective security controls. So this is a cybersecurity risk. And again, give me a table. I asked it for a table to compare the different trends across the reports. So very interesting. Again, the purpose of this demonstration was just to show you how we use ChatGPT in a contextual manner, acting, for example, as an assistant to you as an auditor to consume large amounts of information. So maybe something a bit more closer to home and relevant. I've taken another example as well, which was Jonathan, thank you for, and Cheryl, thank you for sending through the Institute of Risk Management of South Africa report. This was also a very large report, I think a 35 meg PDF. And I thought, let's go through that as well and analyze some of the risks and look at what kind of insights can we get and contextual information can we get specifically with that as well. This time I used a different tool. And it was interesting because I opened the PDF on my computer and I saw this new feature, which we actually just released as Microsoft, and I saw the announcement recently, but I had never used it. It's called Bing Chat Enterprise. Now, if you would have heard, Microsoft Bing, which is the search engine, we recently released a Bing Chat function, which is the public version of almost ChatGPT. What it does is it takes the ChatGPT engine, but it also combines it with a search engine so that all of your information, the questions you ask, etc., are not just going up to 2021, which is when ChatGPT stopped its training. It didn't have information beyond that, but it also uses fresh searchable information, gives you references, etc. However, it's a public tool for personal use. Now, what's important is, if you're going to use this in a business context, like I did with ChatGPT, I used public information. You don't want to be feeding it your own corporate business information, because most of these public models have, retained the right to use your content for training, for learning, and this is personal content, your private content. You might be, you might not have the authorization to use it. Bing Chat Enterprise is different. It's something we've just released. Literally, you can get it for free if you are a Microsoft 365 subscriber. So if you use Microsoft 365, either the business suites or the E3, E5, etc., you have access to that. Then you will have access to Bing Chat Enterprise. You can switch it on. And what it does is it's essentially your corporate version, which means that if you look at the screens here, it says it's your personal, it's for work purposes. All of the information that you send to it remains your property. The property of your company doesn't get sent or shared publicly. It's completely protected. And you can use it in different ways. So when I opened the report and I saw the feature just became available, I thought, great, let me use that. And I said, actually, very simple prompt. I said, summarize the PDF that I'm currently looking at. And I also said, you'll see that you can choose a conversation style to be more creative, more balanced, or more precise. This is very, very important insight, because remember I said that a large language model is, essentially a tool that predicts the next word. Now, predicting the next word means there's a range of possibilities that a word could be. So if I give you an example and I say, the cat is in the, and I say complete the sentence. The cat's in the, it could be the cat's in the house, the cat's in the garden, the cat's in the tree, the cat's in the living room. There's probably equal probabilities that each one of those could be picked by the AI. And likewise, I can say, the milk is in the, typically you would say probably the most probable is in the fridge, but it could be in the bottle. It could be, any of those things. And you can actually ask ChatGPT to say, complete the sentence, but give me the 5 most probable words. And what it does is it would pick one of those, the most probable one, the top one. But it does retain the right to be creative. So actually, sometimes it says, I'm feeling creative right now, and it's a probability, and it's going to say 20% of the time I'm going to pick one of those other options. So it's important to understand that an AI model can be precise. In other words, you need to always pick the most likely, or you can be a little bit more creative and take it in a different direction. This is also why it's very important to prompt it correctly and give it the right context. So now in this case, if I say it's dinner time, the cat is in the, most likely answer is going to be this time kitchen, because you've given it context, which helps the model to make the decisions, because it understands that at dinner time, there's more likely to be presence inside the kitchen than in the tree. So that context becomes very important, and that's how an AI model starts to use the context you give it, the relationship between the words, to start using almost logic or deduction to get to the right solution and the right answer. And likewise, then you can say the milk is probably in the bowl as opposed to in the fridge. And that's just through giving it context. So this is important. So I just wanted to explain that piece before I go on to this demo. So coming back to the risk report, I then said, okay, we'll summarize the PDF. And if you look at the summary, I'm not going to go through the whole summary. It gives me the different sections, South Africa risk, context, the top risks that are in South Africa, the different scenarios that are likely to happen. This is really interesting as well, and specifically call to actions. And what's interesting with Bing as well is it's not like ChatGPT where it will just give you the answer, but it'll give you references as well. And it can also augment what it searches or what it gives you with information from the web. So you'll be able to say, this particular piece of information or reference came from the document, and this particular piece, it actually gathered from this public source, and it gives you the reference as well. So it becomes much more useful as a business tool. So then I said, okay, big report. There was a lot to read, a lot to consume in there. So I said, I need something simpler to consume. Create a table with the top risks from the report, their descriptions and risk treatments and opportunities. Now, this combines sections of all the different areas of the report. And I didn't include the entire content that it gave me, but basically it gave all of the different areas: economic collapse, political stability, the description, what you should do in terms of risk treatment as well. So this is useful, but again, this is just summarization. So now, how do you make it more contextual? So this time I gave it a slightly more complex prompt, and I said, I am where's my mouse gone? Wrong screen. Sorry, I just need to find my pointer. There we go. And this time I gave it context and said, you are the chief risk officer in an insurance broking company. Read the report and list the top 3 risks your company should be concerned about for the next year, and suggest a set of mitigation actions. Show the risk name, the risk description, and why it's relevant to an insurance broking company. So now I'm saying, thanks for the summary, but how does this apply to me? I need you to start interpreting it, knowing what you know about an insurance broking company, because it has this inherent knowledge. Now pick out the most important risks for me, give me why it's relevant, and tell me what I should be doing about it. So now this becomes incredibly actionable. Again, this is, what a risk manager needs to do, is to understand the environmental risks, all the different risks inside of an organization. How does it apply? What are the probabilities? I could have asked it in terms of probabilities of impact as well. because there's some of that content in the report. But very interesting. So it picks out 3 specific ones: large-scale disruption of digitally enabled services, climate change. Obviously, if you're an insurance company, this would be important, and political instability as well, social unrest, violence, etc. So it gives you the relevance to insurance and mitigation actions. So that's great. And as a last point, as a risk manager, what you can do as well is saying, take a different perspective, and this is always good to do this in any model, is to say, play the role of a different person now. This time you're an auditor, and your job is to audit the risk management policies of an organization, and create an audit checklist to check whether this organization has put in place the right management measures and governance. And this was specifically around those 3 points as well. And here it's actually generated a checklist for me. Now, incredibly useful stuff. This does not replace the human. And I think this is one of the most important points I'm trying to make here, is that this is not a replacement. This is a tool, but becomes an incredible productivity tool. And it's really what we call, at this stage, we've entered this what we call the era of the co-pilot. And the best way to explain it is to maybe differentiate what we mean by the co-pilot. There's 2 types of AI that you're seeing emerge at the moment. There's what's called foundation models, and that's things like GPT or Llama. Llama is the large language model that was released by Facebook recently. Bard, which is the Google one. So there's many out there. There's many open source ones as well, some that you can run in the cloud, some in your environments, etc. These kind of foundation models are very large, very complex, very difficult to train, and costly to train. They typically cost hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars to train. Not everybody can do this or should do this. You don't need to do this. GPT and GPT-3 and GPT-4 is what's used by ChatGPT, for example. And again, I've just shown you examples of how you can use them in your context and environment without ever having to train such big models. You don't have to train it. You just have to use it as a reasoning engine, as a tool for additional productivity. And this is where you start to connect it into your organization, into your applications. So what you're seeing emerge, and this is what people are creating, and every piece of every software designer and organization out there is starting to build in these models and creating what's called co-pilots. These are conversational and expert helpers that are scoped to assist you with specific complex tasks. I showed you 2 examples. One is kind of a forensic analysis, and the other one is a interpreting risk and putting together a risk mitigation plan. You could create, and this is using just completely untrained without giving it any other context other than 1 or 2 reports. But think about, with the organizational content that you have, the templates that you might have, the intellectual property that you might have, how do you, in addition to the foundational capabilities of the model, you start to train your own co-pilot? You start to build your own co-pilot that incorporates all that information and that gives you that assistance. And so we're seeing these co-pilots emerge in sales and marketing, in productivity, customer service, competitive intelligence, and you can start to use it in a generic way, but you can also get very specific helpers. And of course, legal. I saw earlier Raphael Siegel's on the call. Welcome, Raphael. Raphael runs a company called Legal Interact, who has a incredible legal or AI lawyer, as well as a tool where they've built in a lot of these AI tools into their products. So if you're in the legal profession, definitely connect with him. And it's very interesting to see how you can use these models to start generating contracts, analyzing contracts, finding, and even making decisions for you. So we had an example in an insurance company where we said, here's the policy, here's the scenario. It's a complex scenario. It's not simple. Should we pay out this policy? Give me reasons as to why, and then give me reasons as to why it should not be paid. And for example, this kind of thing can happen. Give me examples or something or clauses we should add into the contract to make this a more explicit risk that we can manage. So very interesting, and you use these generation tools to help you do that. As a final just quick example, Microsoft also just recently released and announced it's going to be released very soon, the Microsoft 365 Copilot. I'm going to show you that as well. And that is a set of tools that are embedded into your Microsoft 365 that will use your own personal context, connections into the organization, who you connected with, your emails, etc., personal content to make you a more productive individual as well. So it's not like Bing Enterprise, which you can use as a tool. It's actually more powerful than that because it starts to use your own contextual information. I'm going to show you just a quick example of what that looks like in this quick short video. And I hope that you will get the sound. I think I did share computer sound. Okay, so that's just a quick example of what's coming soon. It is currently being used by a few companies that are in early release, but you'll see it appearing very, very soon in the products. So it's just an example. This is not future, this is available today, but it gives you a really good example of how these tools are being implemented in real life and into the everyday tools. I'm going to leave you with one last final slide and then hand over to Michael. And this is just in terms of next steps. Really, it's important to start to understand your data assets. Where do you get started with this? Understand what data you have available in your organization. And it's also the opportunity to not just think incrementally. The playing field has changed. This technology is here today, and it's groundbreaking. Think about reimagining your business. Don't just think incrementally. Rethink about how you do things and how you could be doing things differently, how this could completely change the way you work, not as a replacement, but as an able assistant or co-pilot. Think about things like responsible AI as well. Fairness, reliability and safety, privacy and security, inclusivity, transparency and accountability. And this is important. And again, if you think about how these particular principles, these are the Microsoft responsible AI principles, they map directly to the King 4 principles of governance as well. So very important, but also important to some words of caution. This technology shows and demonstrates an ability to interpret and reason over content. However, they are an assistant. Again, you need to have responsibility in how you use it. They can hallucinate. And by hallucination, I mean, remember that creative button. You can make it, and by not knowing how to prompt it correctly, by not verifying and taking ownership of the content, you can very quickly let it, take you down a creative route, thinking that it's actually giving you facts. So, and it can also amplify bias. So always ask for arguments, counter arguments, etc. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Michael, who's really the expert and can give you all of these words of wisdom as related to how we use this technology. Thank you. Michael?
Thank you, Lionel. just before I start, two things. The first is I just want to make a disclaimer. I am a practicing commercial litigation lawyer and not a medical negligence lawyer, so I'm not included in that category of lawyers that Lionel referred to. The second thing is Lionel and I have worked for years, worked together for years, and I learn more and more every day from him. But the one thing I always love is, which Lionel used today, was it's really very simple and easy to understand. Well, Lionel, I just want to tell you that when I'm working with you, nothing that you tell me is easy and simple to understand. And I have to keep reminding you that I'm a lawyer, not an aeronautical engineer. So thank you for another brilliant presentation. It's lovely to be with you, Jonathan. We've worked happily together over many years in different subjects, particularly so much work which we did on King, and I really must acknowledge you in that field. You were really one of the first people to appreciate the importance of governance, of the King reports, to embrace it and to share it with your clients. So we're always grateful to you in the governance world for your embracing of corporate governance. So Lionel's given you the very exciting part of it. And now, from a governance perspective, I'm going to tell you some of the problems or challenges rather, no problems, challenges, and things that you need to be aware of from a governance perspective. So I'm going to go back to our New Companies Act, which replaced the then existing Companies Act and was rewritten at the time just after the global financial crisis. And one of the major changes in that new act, there were many, but for purposes of this brief discussion, one of the major ones was to take the majority, not all, but the majority of the common law duties and obligations of directors and to put them into the statute with draconian consequences. And the impact of that was that whilst they were part of the common law, judges had discretion how to punish for breaches. But once they were in the statute, that discretion was largely taken away. And the other was to extend those duties, obligations, and liabilities to not only directors of companies, but also people that sat on company committees, and also what is known in the Act as a prescribed officer, basically people who are involved in the direction and management of the company, particularly but not exclusively financially. And they have the same liability as directors. So we were writing King 3 together with the task team drafting the New Companies Act, led by the Canadian Phil Knight. And one of the issues which arose was that the Act did not recognize people who acted correctly, ethically, in what they believed to be the best interests of the company. But things went wrong. And that led to the introduction in our Companies Act. There's an academic argument that it always was part of the common law, but that falls outside this discussion. The introduction into our Act of something which is known as the Business Judgment Rule. And all of you who are directors, prescribed officers, committee members should make the Business Judgment Rule part of your DNA. So I really don't have a presentation other than a paper which I was a co-author of, which I'll give to Jonathan to share for those of you who would like to read it. It explains exactly what the Business Judgment Rule is. Basically what that rule says, it recognizes that people can act ethically in the best, what they believe the best interests of the company, but things go wrong, and it shields them from liability, provided that 3 requirements are met. And all 3 have to be met. The first is that you can never act if you are conflicted. And the paper which we'll share with you will talk more about conflict. But for purposes of this discussion, I want to focus on the second one, which is that you have to be properly informed. And whilst the rule allows one to rely on the opinions of experts, you still need to be able to, you still are required rather to have stress tested that to ensure that you can rely upon it before you give an opinion or an advice. So to take an example, which is probably familiar to all of you, a lawyer or an advocate gives you an opinion. You can't simply take that opinion and present it to the company, to the board, to any other stakeholder and say, this is what the position is. You are required under this rule to read it, to understand it, to question it. In other words, stress test it before you take it on as your own opinion. Otherwise, it's not your opinion. It's the opinion of someone else, which you are repeating. And that plays very much into what Lionel has so eloquently explained to you today, is that you can't simply relax for the weekend before your board presentation on Monday, and late on Sunday night, after consuming much food and wine, go to ChatGPT and ask it to prepare your presentation for the board, and arrive the next morning and dish it out and say, here's my presentation. It's not yours. It's a report which has been generated by, it's an automated response. And for it to be your opinion, you have to have stress tested that opinion, to have questioned it, and to make sure that you can refer to it as your opinion. So it's an assistant. It doesn't have the superhuman talents of curiosity, humility, emotional intelligence. It's been generated in from an automated system, and it's not your opinion. You may have prompted it. So in a proper governance world, you have to disclose that this is not my opinion, it's a generated opinion. I haven't had an opportunity to stress test it. And this very important governance aspect was very well explained in probably one of the most leading governance cases in the world, an Australian case which is referred to in the paper, you'll see, which we affectionately or disaffectionately, depends what side of it you're on, refer to as the Centro case. In that case, the judge, in dealing with the liability of non-executive directors who had voted in favor of the adoption of the audited accounts, which were subsequently found to be a fraud, and there was a massive loss which was incurred by the banks and the shareholders. The judge said, you can't tell me today that you said you approved these accounts, because the chairman of the audit committee presented the accounts to you after working with the auditors, and he was happy with them. You have to have a sufficient knowledge and understanding of these accounts, an independent, understanding, questioning mind that looked at these accounts. And when you said, yes, I approve them, it was your approval and not you approving because somebody else had approved. So the big lesson from what Lionel has explained to us this morning is that this is of enormous assistance, but from a governance perspective, it doesn't stop there. What Lionel's explained to you, what you generate, is then for you to sit down in order to comply with the business judgment rule, which shields you from liability if things go wrong, and to be able to tell a court, I used ChatGPT or I used Bing, but when I relied upon it, it was after I had, to the best of my knowledge, independently, with no conflict, had questioned what I didn't understand. I had sought expert opinion, and I honestly and reasonably believed this to be correct. So what Lionel has shown us what to generate is half the journey, and we need to complete the journey from a governance perspective to have the benefit of the business judgment rule. I'm using only the business judgment rule to explain it. You'll have the same issue if you're being questioned by the auditors when you're relying on a directors and officers liability insurance as to how your conduct, how you questioned, how you interrogated, and how you were satisfied that you understood and that you could convey it as your opinion, what you had generated. And as I said, to repeat myself, in that questioning, in that understanding, in that interrogating, you will be bringing to that content what are known as the 3 human super talents of curiosity, humility, and emotional intelligence, which is absolutely important, because it's not sufficient for it just to have intellectual intelligence. So the two working together, but the huge advantage and the excitement of what Lionel has explained to us is the ability to interrogate, which we couldn't do before, these vast amounts of information, gather it together and use that as the base for our opinion. So it has now enables us to give an opinion which would not humanly have been possible to do before. So if I was giving an opinion on those reports to my board, which Lionel's just explained, I would unquestionably never have been able to do it in the depth that AI did it. But then when I'm given all of that, then comes what's very important, which I've outlined for you today. So what Lionel doesn't yet know the extent of the journey that he still has with me. I'm a co-author of the governance document, which we're in the course of preparing, on how AI should be used in a governance world, the guardrails, the protections, how we deal with things like bias, algorithmic bias, which finds its way into the results of AI, and all of these issues. The world's wrestling with it at the moment. Lionel gets a volume of documents from every day from me. I think the EU are getting close, Lionel, to a document to release. The US is also getting close, and South Africa will be very much up to date on it. And just before we go to questions, there were 2 things that I just wanted to emphasize, because they give credence to what I've spoken about, the importance of the human involvement. So when you were looking at the risks that came out of that report, and if you'd relied simply on that, you would only have relied on those, if I remember correctly, 3 risks. But in a recent webinar in which I was involved with 3 of the world's leading governance experts, and we were talking about risk and the new talents which directors in the new world need to have, 2 very important risks didn't appear there. The first is it spoke about country risk. And one of the most important attributes which came out of this webinar with these global experts was the importance of having directors who understand geopolitical risks. So take a country like Australia, closing down many industries, importing from Vietnam and China. What happens if the South Sea China erupts? China invades Taiwan. The whole of the South Sea, it becomes an absolute nightmare. How do the goods come in? So geopolitical risk has become a very important attribute which a board needs to have, not just an understanding of country risk. And the other, which is a huge risk, which wasn't picked up there and is also a very, very important thing for boards to have an understanding of, is ESG, the environmental, social, and governance. Now, it picked up in the risk, the environmental, climate change, but climate change is just one subset of the environmental issues. The social is a critical issue as we move into this woke environment. Can destroy a company's reputation and a brand in nanoseconds. It's a huge risk to be dealt with at board meetings. And then, of course, the governance. So you can see how what that generates with what you bring to it, if you put the two together, then you have a complete recipe. So thank you so much, Lionel, for another brilliant presentation. And I'm happy to deal with anything more in question time. I'm just conscious of the fact that we've only got 3 minutes left, and I'm not sure how much time there is for questioning, and I hope that I had sufficient time to just bring to the fore the importance of being able to marry the governance with what Lionel's explained to us today. Thanks, Jonathan.
Yeah, thank you very much, Michael, and thank you, Lionel. We will still be on for quite, 10, 15 minutes if people would like to ask questions. Just one thing, Michael, the risk report does cover the geopolitical risk, and it does cover the whole of ESG. It's Lionel's questions that focused it in on those particular risks, but
on the top three. I said top three
yeah,
only.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So I just thought I would, IRMSA have in their report covered all those risks, but you are right. They're critical risks that you often don't think about. Yeah, well, you do think about, but you. Yeah.
That's why I'm saying I raised it, because it's an interesting debate. In the top three, this global webinar recognized those two of today, of geopolitical.
Yes, and how AI, by using AI, if you don't then dig a bit deeper, how you could miss things, and as you say, how you have to question and not just as you say on Sunday night, just quickly get ChatGPT to do your board report for you quickly. Yeah,
because if the minutes of that meeting showed that you focused on country risk,
yeah, you'd be negligent.
And China invaded Taiwan, and there were no chips. So it's an incredible assistant. You could never have presented what Lionel presented. A human being could never have absorbed that and prepared that.
No. The
two sit so closely together, which is why we present together. The governance without what Lionel's is of no use, and what Lionel presents without the governance is of no use. The two sit together. I just want to add, and I don't work for Microsoft, but if you go into all of this, Lionel just didn't touch on it. All of these things which we talk about are part of what Microsoft emphasized to every Microsoft user that you should be doing. So in a governance world, Microsoft are very, very involved in ensuring that there's good governance in all of their products. So that isn't something that we went in today, but all of this is not new to Microsoft. We're just bringing it as part of the discussion today.
Yeah, thank you very much, Absolutely. Michael. Thanks, Lionel. Thanks. Are there any questions? I think Cheryl will open the floor now, and let's take some questions from the audience. I think if people put their hands up, it would be great.
Everyone can unmute if they need to.
I don't see any hands up at the moment. Maybe it was very well explained.
Yeah. I don't know if you saw that article recently. They set out to ascertain what were the most used terms in the last couple of years. And did you see what it was? You're on mute.
Yeah, exactly. What was the third? You mentioned conflicted and properly informed. What is the third? Is that acting in the best interests of an organization?
Acting in the best interests of it's expanded the organization and all of its stakeholders.
Ah, okay.
Understanding that shareholders are just one subset of the stakeholders. We have a stakeholder-centric model, so it's all of the stakeholders.
Yeah. I was paying attention to business judgment, you see. So,
yeah. Jonathan, if anybody does want the paper, do you have it? Otherwise, if Cheryl can just remind me, I'll forward it to you. But I think I did once give it to you.
But I think if you could send it again, Michael,
I will.
And
okay,
I'll do a brief write-up after on the info sharing and share your slides, Lionel, as well as then the recording goes up, in a couple of days' time. So
just one other thing before we end, which may be helpful to some of the people listening, is that please bear in mind the importance of AI in the HR, the human resources field. Firstly, AI is now, as Lionel knows only so well, is now being used extensively in the recruitment process. And there you've got to be very, very careful about algorithmic bias. There's a big court case at the moment, and I'm not sure if it's in Canada or the US. I think it's been settled with a lot of money, where the way it was written, there was a bias against people over 35. So that wasn't a problem for me, but could be, a problem. So be very careful of when you're using it from a bias. But what the point I want to raise, very important, is to make sure that you have policies and procedures in your organization regarding the use of AI and the importance of employees being obliged as a cardinal sin not to do it, to disclose where AI has been used and that what is presented to them is their work and not something that has been generated, or if generated, that the final document is in fact their work and all of what I've spoken about has been used. So we're having a lot, I know from our labor lawyer, a lot of issues where things are going horribly wrong. Because one of the things which is very important is not everybody can prompt like Lionel can prompt. So I will sit and think about what I think is a brilliant prompt, runner through Lionel, who will tell me to scrap it in a form that it can never be revived, and this is how what the prompt should be. So very, very careful that what you are presented, that what you give to a major customer, what the major customer relies upon, was not generated by somebody who didn't know how to prompt, has been given an incorrect document, and you've relied upon it, assuming that it's their work. So it's become a critical issue in the workplace that there's absolute, frank, open, and immediate disclosure, whether this is the person's work or whether it's work combined with generated, or if it's generated and there's no involvement from the person. Has become a major workplace issue.
I think Michael, oh, sorry, Michael, carry on.
For a lot of people, it means a lot more time at the coffee shop and in the pub, and a lot less working time, with lots of, and most of a huge number of employees go to bed every night blessing Lionel and Microsoft for the fact that there's more drinking and socializing time. Be very careful that finds its way into your employment environment, employment contracts, and what you give to a major client or customer.
I think universities and learning institutions and schools, all the, writing exams and assignments, I know that's a big problem, because my kids are at that stage at the moment, and yeah, that ChatGPT has got to be used carefully, I think.
The major
Absolutely.
talking issue at universities and schools is, how do we generate it using ChatGPT and disguise it so that the teacher doesn't know?
Right.
Can we close with your story, Lionel?
Yeah, well, there's a couple of stories actually on that side. Is my kids use it, obviously, and so do all the kids. They recently all handed an assignment in, and they spent a lot of time changing their prompts to make sure it would be different. What they didn't realize is mostly the introduction and the conclusion was the same for all of them. The inside of the content was different, so the teacher gave them all 0. And then another story is one of the children actually put in, they had on a book which he hadn't read, and the book happened to share the same name as a poem that was a different poem as well. So he submitted his summary of the book, what he thought was the book, of course never read it, then realized that it was actually writing on the poem. So yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And this is an extension of the business judgment rule in schools.
That's right. That's right. Is ChatGPT banned in 1 or 2 countries, or in some countries? I'm sure I read somewhere that it was banned or disallowed, or.
I think it's possible. I'm not sure. I think it's possible, just because of, it's got so much knowledge and information, and if you're trying to restrict and censor, then it would make sense that you would try and ban it as well. But it's very difficult. It's kind of you can download offline versions of models which are maybe not as powerful and big as ChatGPT, but that you can use as well. So
just hang on,
so
baby.
it's very
Literally a minute.
Oh.
Sorry, guys. Italy. It's banned in Italy. Sorry, I got distracted there.
There we go. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. I think with the right controls and guardrails, that's exactly what's required. And this is one of the big focus areas of Microsoft and what we call Azure OpenAI, is we wrap these different models that are available into a governance kind of framework, put the guardrails around it to look at controls around bias, around responsible AI, and you can control and then govern how it's used and what comes out of it.
And I think it was Microsoft who took the lead, bringing together the Googles and the others of this world to put together, and they working together on the guardrails, the responsible use of AI, the toothpaste out of the tube. The banning in Italy is worth nothing, and particularly in Italy where nobody follows a law. Everybody will have found a way in Italy to use it. They're probably the biggest users at the moment. So, but the critically important thing is, I think, for me to end, it's laughable to ban it. You can't ban anything. People all you do is just make them cleverer how they find how to use it. The sensible approach to this, toothpaste out of the tube, are the guardrails and the responsible use of it, and setting in your own organization, following the templates that the Microsoft this world are producing, is how to use this incredible tool responsibly, ethically, effectively, in a conscious way, with all of the guardrails. You can't fight against it. Embrace it, love it, and use it responsibly. It's the most wonderful, wonderful tool. So I'm just very lucky because I've got an avatar called Lionel Moyal.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Lionel. I see Derek had his hand up for a bit, but I don't see any hands up. So last chance to ask any questions, anyone, and then we're going to call it a day and say thank you to Michael and Lionel. Any other questions? We're not getting any questions there. So thank you very much, Michael. Thank you, Lionel. It was a fascinating presentation. So I'm looking forward to getting it out there to the greater audience. There weren't that many people online today, but it will go out to a lot of people in our newsletter, and a lot of people will see this. So thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thanks, Jonathan. Wonderful to work with you again. And as usual, you would be one of the first to approach us to do this because you like to be there, one of the first to market.
Yeah. Thanks, Michael. Thanks, Lionel.